Support for this episode comes from Gvoke HypoPen. Most people who take insulin have experienced low blood sugar. It can be disorienting and scary. Very low blood sugar is very scary. And that's where Gvoke HypoPen comes in. Gvoke HypoPen is a ready-to-use rescue pen for treating very low blood sugar in people with diabetes ages 2 and above. If you take insulin or sulfonylureas, you are at risk for your blood sugar going too low. Low blood sugar emergencies can happen unexpectedly, and they demand quick action. You need a safety net when it matters most. Be ready to treat very low blood sugar with Gvoke HypoPen. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Gvoke logo. Gvoke shouldn't be used if you have a tumor in the gland on top of your kidneys called pheochromocytoma, or if you have a tumor in your pancreas called insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk for safety information.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, it looked like a big win for parents of kids with diabetes earlier this year when the DOJ ruled that CGM can be considered standard of care at school. Unfortunately, the lawyers fighting for families in this case tell me it's not that simple. The Department of Justice ruling may have to be litigated on local levels across the country. They're back to talk to me about what happened, what you need to know, and how you can make your issue known if your child's school is giving you a hard time about continuous glucose monitoring. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome, everybody, to another week of the show. I am always so glad to have you here. You know, we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. Still nursing a bit of a cold. Sorry about my voice, but we will muddle through. Want to let you know before we jump in with the interview here that I am hosting a Halloween webinar along with Anna Sabino. She's a diabetes educator. She's with Finding Smiles Coaching. She lives with type 1. And we're hosting that webinar actually today as this episode goes live, Tuesday the 15th. It's at noon. So you can still register for it if you're listening early enough, but we are going to record it. So if you're interested in that, definitely shoot me an email, Stacey@diabetes-connections.com, and I'll send you the recording. Also, I have a download on my website. I have a bunch of free downloads under the resources tab over at diabetes-connections.com, and you can get the free guide for Halloween. If you have tried that recently and had an issue, thanks to the folks who let me know, I won't give you all the backstory here, but there was a change on the back end of one of the vendors we use. And so a lot of those free downloads weren't available for a little while. And I really appreciate those of you who brought it to my attention. So definitely go check that out. It's, Halloween, it's travel advice with a free packing list, community sourced ideas on how to get your gear to stick, lots of good stuff. And it is free. And I got to get a quick mention of Mom's Night Out because we had something really exciting happen. We are going to be in the Philadelphia suburbs. Cherry Hill, New Jersey is the actual location, October 25th and 26th. Registration closes on October 20th, so please don't wait. We will be in Atlanta at the end of January, the very last weekend there, January 31st and February 1st. We have our early bird special going on for that. And Atlanta moms, you came out of the gate strong on this. I think this is going to be a big event, so I'm really excited about it. Thank you to everybody who's already signed up for Atlanta. Holy cow. But I need to let you know that for Philadelphia, we have just added Omnipod After Dark. We're doing an after party in Philadelphia. I am so excited about this. Thank you so much to Omnipod. The sponsors are getting super creative, and we're having a lot of fun with this. So more details to come. If you're registered for Philly, watch your email because I'm sending you more details about this. You don't have to do anything extra. You just have to stick around a little bit more Friday night and have a good time. Okay, on to the issue at hand this week, which is CGM in school. And I know a lot of people kind of roll their eyes at this and think, oh, these parents are crazy. They're all helicoptering. But this isn't about, having 15 people follow your kid every minute while they're at school. This is about the real danger that can arise when a school refuses to do what is considered standard of care. I mean, I got to be honest with you. I feel like I was very naive about this before doing the interview back in February, which I will link up here, because I did kind of think this was about, following at school, which we never had anyone follow Benny at school. And, he was fine. This is about schools where they refuse to allow children to wear CGM. where they refuse to do checks of any kind during the school day. It sounds so improbable, but it does happen. And the Department of Justice ruled on CGM specifically earlier this year. And a lot of us thought that was the end of it. The attorneys here were very hopeful. They were looking to gather information so they could kind of spread the word through these school districts. But it turns out it is a lot more complicated than that. So the same attorneys are back with me to tell us what happened here, how we can help, how you can get help if you need it. So I'm talking to Bonnie Roswig. She is an attorney with a small nonprofit legal center for children's advocacy that focuses on addressing legal needs of vulnerable children. And I'm also talking to Jonathan Chappell. He lives with type 1. He was diagnosed as an adult, and he is a private practice lawyer in Connecticut. He's a past president of local JDRFs, and he's a board member. He's passionate about diabetes, but both of these folks are passionate about getting schools to do the right thing here. My talk with Bonnie and Jonathan right after this. For many of you, as you listen, this is going to sound like a weird question. Why do you use the insulin pump you've got on right now? There's a really good chance that you went on that pump 15 or 20 years ago because it's what your doctor had back then, and you've never really thought about changing. That was us until Benny's Pump Company went out of business, and I was amazed how much things had changed when we looked for a new one. I'm telling you, it is time to take advantage of what's new. If you need a sign to switch, this is it. Omnipod 5, the tubeless automated insulin delivery system, is here, and it's available through the pharmacy, which means that you can try it today, even if your tubed pump is under warranty. Fill out the quick online form, see if you're eligible for a free trial. Go to diabetes-connections.com, click on the Omnipod logo. For full safety risk information and free trial terms and conditions, visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections. Bonnie Roswig, Jonathan Chappell, welcome back. I'm really glad you're here. Thanks so much for sharing some more time with me and my listeners.
Thanks so much for having us again, Stacey.
Jonathan, let me start with you. Where do we stand right now? Can you give us a brief update before we go into what you're looking for now?
Sure. So the last time we were here, we discussed the substance of what we had done in 2020 and that we had heard from a lot of families more recently. And our suggestion to families that were having problems was that unfortunately they would probably be best to file an administrative complaint with the Department of Justice. While we were looking for a more global resolution, at this point, we are in that same suggestion in that families all around the country will have to file individual complaints with their local federal Department of Justice office. We've gained some traction with the DOJ. And what I mean by that is that we have had 3 confirmed open investigations, which just means that the local office of the federal agency has opened an investigation based on the complaints that were filed with the office, and that they are now seeking fact-finding. They'll probably contact families, contact the school, etc. Well, that's good news. We have some traction and 3 offices have opened. We would like to have many more if that's what they require before we get the solution we're seeking.
Before we go further, Bonnie, let me ask you, from where I sit, and we just got started, it seems really frustrating. I thought last time we talked that this Department of Justice ruling in the Northeast was going to cover the country. That's not what happened here.
So in theory, it should cover the country because they were determinations of the Justice Department. As we talked about the last time, when the Justice Department decides something, they are conceptually, in any event, opening that investigation and making that determination, not on behalf of an individual, but on behalf of the United States of America. That's the basis on which they're prosecuting, or not particularly prosecuting, but pursuing the issue. This is a determination has been made that this is a violation of a law that affects not just here in Connecticut, but in every single state. Unfortunately, people don't understand it necessarily the obligation when the Justice Department makes a determination. And so some of the feedback we've gotten has been, oh, that was just Connecticut. That doesn't affect us here in fill in the blank, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Florida, etc. And so in order to drive home this point, parents across the country have had to file their own cases, again, based on what we feel is sort of quintessential, what we call precedent in Connecticut, and that other states should follow as well. And really, it is, not just what the Connecticut cases say, it's what the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act says. Every now and again, a parent will say to us, well, show me where in the Americans with Disabilities Act it talks about type 1 diabetes. Mm-hmm. The answer is it does not. What it does talk about is the fact that in anyone who has a healthcare condition, a disability, has the right to fully participate, just like anyone who does not have a disability. And what the school needs to provide is a reasonable modification. And that's what our Connecticut decision said. Our Connecticut decision said was that a reasonable modification under the Americans with Disabilities Act is monitoring a CGM and following doctor's orders.
Got it. Jonathan, let me ask you then, what's the next step here? What are you looking for?
Unfortunately, as we described, we're doing this district by district, school by school, state by state at this point. And so what we really need people to do is, if they are still experiencing these issues with the CGM, that they need to seek the only remedy that appears to be reasonably available to them at this point. And that means we need people in every state, every district within every state to continue to file, and they can do so on their own. They could do so with the template complaint that's been circulated out there, and they can do so with or without contacting us. They don't need to have a lawyer for this process. The Department of Justice will receive the complaint and decide what to do with it, if anything. We do have certain states where we've had the ability to both contact certain members of the DOJ, and so we're in the pending status, if you will. And we have others where we have families but don't necessarily have a DOJ linkage at this point. And so we're basically recruiting still, and we want to revive those recruitment efforts because at this point we need more numbers.
Got it. So quick question about that. Having not gone through this process myself, if you're filling out the form, which we will link up in the show notes, I assume it's easy to get and easy to fill out. From the end of the parent, I'd be nervous. Like, am I sending this out into the ether? Do you get a confirmation that anybody ever looks at it?
That is a little bit of the challenge. We are not, and our parents who have these violations, schools refusing to follow CGMs, we are not the only ones that are filing complaints with the Justice Department. There is a broad number of violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act in a number of different areas. And so the Justice Department gets a huge number of complaints. We can only hope that this is something that raises concern. One of the things I've said over time, Stacey, is that the irony of these cases, particularly around CGMs, is that it is a really easy answer. All the school nurse has to do is glance at an app or the designated trained person. There are many issues out there, many civil rights issues, even related to disability. They're very complicated to solve. This is an easy one. So it continues to be perplexing as to why the issue exists at all. And, we feel it's an easy resolution. It's not complicated. It's not expensive. That is a little bit of our optimism as to why, we'll get some, parents will get results. the parents do have to be aware that by filing the complaint, it doesn't necessarily mean that their problem is going to be solved. But, in terms of the work that we've been doing, it's certainly reasonable to try. And the success so far has been that the Justice Department, as Jonathan said, has opened up investigations in 3 states. And the fact that these different state offices get thousands of complaints, we are grateful that they've opened these investigations and optimistic that the Justice Department is looking at this issue seriously.
It might be a good idea to pause here for a second and talk about what we're talking about in terms of the complaints. I think folks who listen to the first episode, and I'll link that up, you can go back and listen to that there. We kind of went through that as I expressed a little bit of skepticism, having a kid who went through elementary school basically without a CGM. It is remarkable to realize how many schools aren't just perhaps not following every child every minute of the day. Some of these schools aren't allowing CGM in at all. They don't understand the technology. They just say no. Jonathan, can you give us a couple of examples of what you are dealing with here? Because I just want to make sure people have the right understanding of why the DOJ would get involved here. This isn't a question of like, the nurse doesn't want to follow on her personal phone. Support for this episode comes from Dexcom. Diabetes doesn't always have to interrupt your day. Dexcom G7, a continuous glucose monitoring system, sends your glucose numbers to your phone or receiver. Know where you are and where you're headed without finger sticks and without interruptions. Dexcom G7 is the most accurate CGM, and it's covered by Medicare. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Finger sticks required if symptoms or expectations do not match readings. See user guide for instructions. Data on file must meet coverage criteria. For full prescribing information on risks and benefits, visit Dexcom.com.
Yeah, and as you know, I'm type 1, so I have a little bit of hands-on experience.
Right.
Well, so 2 issues. One that we hear a lot is the liability issue. That's really confusing, to be completely honest. I mean, they're liable, and they are obligated under the law to follow, pardon the pun, to keep track of a child with type 1, whether they use a CGM or they don't. So just like your son, they had to care for your son to allow him to receive the education that he's entitled to. And so they still do. And if anything, the technology is improved. And at this point, the liability seems to be higher to not monitor blood glucose with this technology, because they have to monitor and react to the blood glucose levels without the technology. So it's really, sometimes it's convenient to say it's too hard or creates too much risk and therefore they can't do it. It's very difficult to parse out exactly what that liability defense is. So that's one. Another one that comes up is that, we can't take delegation of orders from parents, or the orders are not exact and therefore we're not going to follow. And that is also an unreasonable stance, in my opinion, that one, diabetes is different. You don't take one Tylenol each day, and at some point you might need 2. Right? I mean, this is ever changing. Each day is different. Each activity is different. Sometimes each meal is the same thing every day, but a different amount of insulin is required. So it's a fluid disease. The doctors on the outside of the school seem to understand that. And so they can order certain things to be fluid. That, yes, you can talk to mom or dad and they can make adjustments on insulin dosing. This technology is ever evolving, but again, it makes it very simple. If you look at these numbers, the FDA has approved most of these devices for use in treatment decisions. And so if the doctor orders that if the number is X and there is an arrow straight down, that you are to treat it like a hypoglycemic event, that shouldn't be any different than if you get that number from a glucometer and a finger stick. So I think there's some miseducation that is tied to this as well.
Listening to the challenge that you have here and knowing that we're asking for people from all over the country to fill out this form and ask for help, do you guys have enough staff for this? I mean, I'm kind of laughing because it seems like you'd need an army of lawyers. But do you mind giving us a peek of the process here? Do you work with other law firms? Is it just a lot of paperwork? I don't even know what I'm asking, Bonnie, but you know what I'm asking? Like, how are you going to do this?
Absolutely. I understand what you're saying, Stacey. So when Jonathan and I started on this voyage, we were working with a small group of parents who had seen the 2020 Connecticut decisions. And as we discussed the last time, the reason for the gap between the decisions that came out in 2020 and people contacting us in the summer of 2023 was the obvious COVID. COVID is a risk factor for diabetes. Many parents did not send their children back immediately. But in 2023, parents reached out to us. We started to work with this group. And Jonathan and I filed complaints on behalf of a number of parents. But as the issue grew and the parent group grew, we realized that because it's just Jonathan and I work for a small nonprofit in Connecticut called the Center for Children's Advocacy. Jonathan works for a small law firm also in Connecticut doing all this work pro bono. And so we realized that we couldn't represent each and every family. However, the issue was always the same. It is, the federal law, the Americans with Disabilities Act that should protect these children is the same. And the experience, it is remarkable that from, New York to Massachusetts to Texas to Georgia to Florida to California to Utah, the stories are identical. Couldn't possibly follow it. Don't understand. Don't have the time. Oh, these terrible parents want us to watch a CGM 24/7. Oh, the liability. What we realized was that one way to address this was to create a template complaint for parents so that they could complete basically most of the information and that we would be happy to provide support so that they were including the parts of the story that were important for the Justice Department to hear and showed that the actions of the school was violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. So in a way, Jonathan and I are the conduit to helping parents understand what they need to say. We do our best to connect parents with the appropriate people at the local U.S. attorney's offices, which is the state branch of the Justice Department, and then proceed to support in any way that we can. But you're absolutely right, Stacey. We do need an army for this. The interesting thing about the Justice Department is that, as Jonathan said earlier, you do not need to be an attorney to file these. Any citizen can raise their concerns to the Justice Department. One of the reasons that we created the template was if people aren't lawyers, they don't always know the magic words. They know their experience. They've lived the trauma of feeling that their children are at risk, but they don't always know how to articulate it in a way that the Justice Department needs to hear it. We just provided that support. That's kind of how this process rolled out. I think what we're trying to say is that it is very useful. Number one, it's a way for parents to get relief to file these complaints, but also, it's one thing if one parent in Washington state is saying I'm having this problem, but if 3 parents or 5 parents or 10 parents, and we know they're out there, then it makes the issue more powerful. People should not be afraid to do this. Jonathan and I are here to support. Retaliation is not okay under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And again, it can feel scary to parents because, I'm filing this, with the federal government. And we don't think that people should be afraid to do this. And as we've said, Jonathan and I are here to help support. We have interacted with hundreds of parents.
This is where we are in terms of it'd be great if this problem would just be fixed, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for whatever the reason, it has not yet been fixed in a way that we know that future and current type 1 families will not be impacted by this. Nobody could tell you that that is the case. And also, nobody can tell you that it's a guarantee that we will succeed in this effort and that change will happen. But we're pretty confident that it will. And we are also pretty confident that it will only do so if we get enough attention to the issue that it's addressed globally or case by case across the country by the DOJ.
So as a person who lives with diabetes yourself, Jonathan, what is it like when you do talk to the parents that have had success in either litigating this or just getting movement from their school, regardless if it goes to the DOJ? Just sometimes speaking about this can make a change. So what is it like for you when you hear from those parents?
I was diagnosed as an adult, so I get a different view of things. And they've always been champions on whatever the issue is. So, when I talk to the parents and they get very emotional over the issue, and it's hard for me not to be honest, but it's also, it really is so stupid. My wife is a teacher. Of all the things the school could do to avoid a federal obligation, this does not appear to be somewhere where you would die about. So to even put themselves at the risk of a DOJ investigation and potential fines and the like does not appear to be a risk that they should pick the many possibilities of getting liability. So it's difficult for me to understand, but also the passion is there. If it turns on passion, I guarantee the parents are going to win this.
I love it. Well, Bonnie Roswig, Jonathan Chappell, thank you so much for joining me again. Keep us posted. I'm more than happy to have you back on as we go through this process. Just shoot me an email and we will speak again. But I really appreciate your time. And thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you for helping us spread the word, Stacey. We really appreciate it.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information in the show notes, as always. I will link up the form that they mentioned, and you can email either of them. There's contact information there. It may take a while because you can imagine they are inundated and they are a small team. They're passionate, they're serious, and they're getting this done. Again, the show notes, if you are new around here, should be available wherever you are listening, Apple or Spotify or, whatever podcast player you use. If you have any trouble with that, you can head on over to diabetes-connections.com, where every episode has its own homepage, and you can find the links there. All right, I'm going to go take some cold medicine. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims, and I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.
As you're managing life with diabetes, EdgePark is here to support you on your health journey. Discover convenience and peace of mind with EdgePark, your trusted supplier in diabetes management supplies. EdgePark has a wide variety of pump and CGM solutions from top brands to fit your unique needs. Plus, EdgePark works with most insurance companies and handles the paperwork to navigate insurance complexities for you and make the ordering process as seamless as possible. You work hard to manage your diabetes. Let EdgePark take care of the rest. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the EdgePark logo.